Welcome to the latest installment of our ongoing Coffee Talk editorial webinar series. Today's topic is why cloud firewalls and why now? If you've attended any of our previous Coffee Talk episodes, you know that each hour-long information-packed episode features observations and insights of an independent expert on a wide range of tech topics. This particular episode is sponsored by Zscaler, so many thanks to them, because without their support, this series would not be possible. And thanks to you, of course, for joining us. I'm Gladys Rama, the editorial director, and I'll be moderating this Coffee Talk episode today. Before we get started, just a couple bits of housekeeping. First, this episode is being recorded, so an email from us with a link to that recording will be coming your way in the next few days. Second, we are making some time during the talk for questions, so please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many of them as we can today, and if we don't, we'll follow up with you after this Coffee Talk episode is over. Third, on the left-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a bunch of resources provided by Zscaler, so please be sure to check those out. Again, thank you to Zscaler for providing those resources and supporting us today. And finally, as a small thank you to you, the audience, for attending today, the first 200 of you who stick with us to the end will receive a $5 gift certificate to Starbucks. Now it's time to meet our first presenter. You may know him if you've attended any of our other summits or our Coffee Talk episodes. This presenter is Ian Thornton-Trump. He's the CISO for Cyjax Limited in the UK and the CTO of Octopi Managed Services in Canada. Ian is an ITIL certified IT pro with 25 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity. He's also served with the Canadian Forces, the Military Intelligence Branch, the Canadian Forces Military Police Reserve, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as a criminal intelligence analyst. Since then, he's worked as a cybersecurity consultant for multinational insurance, banking, and regional healthcare verticals. Ian has deep experience with the threats facing SMBs and enterprises, and we are so happy to have him back today for this Coffee Talk episode. Ian, take it away, please.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's always my pleasure. And a huge shout out to our sponsor, Zscaler, allowing me to come and take the stage for a little bit to talk about the things that I care about, which is really exciting. Now, as you folks all know, if you've been following me for a while, you know I come from this military background and threat actor background and all this kind of stuff. But I think what you need to look at is high level. I do a lot of things with the community. The Beer Farmers, which is a group that I'm part of, we're announcing a call for papers for DTX here in the UK, which is a digital transformation conference. We hold a conference inside that conference. It'll be in our 5th year called BeerCon 5. So shameless plug, give us a follow on at the Beer Farmers on Twitter as well as at Fat Hobbit. And of course, you can always give Zscaler a follow as well. I bet you they would love that. Okay, so with no further ado, I can put up the old network that we all had. Now, I've picked out a few of these models because historically I have a connection to them, and I've had some really interesting discoveries being in that space. As you can see, I start with the PIX, which was essentially one of the very first on-premise firewalls that I ever used. And then, of course, there was a time where we did WatchGuards and SonicWall and Fortinet, all in various flavors that are both enterprise capable and small, medium business appropriate. Times have changed. And as you can see in very graphic style right on this slide, the threat landscape has morphed. And we have gone from the moat castle approach to defending our data, defending the integrity and the confidentiality of our systems, and of course the availability of our systems. Unfortunately, and you know this because if you've ever managed to travel to Europe and the United Kingdom, you'll see a plethora of castles, many of which are abandoned or now serve no other purpose than as historical relics of the past. So what is really true is I'm not saying your businesses today don't need firewalls to guard their on-premise stuff, but there are newer and better ways to approach the problem of protecting and controlling access to the crown jewels of your company. Because now, my friends, the actual model, threat model, looks a lot like this, where your business is built on the pillars, if you will, of cloud-hosted systems, be it in-house, be it in your own data center under your own tenants. Now, I have a fair amount of experience using Zscaler and its products. I've at enterprise level. So if it's a super technical discussion, that's going to be handed off to the good folks that will be joining us very shortly for their presentation. But what I can tell you is it has solved a number of major business struggles and problems with this new threat model, which is your castle, your business is built upon the cloud. Now, one of the issues that we're faced with in the industry is the difficulty in adapting to the changing threat landscape. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, IT people are maybe not the most, shall we say, receptive to embracing new ideas, okay? But as indicated, there are better approaches, approaches that go beyond where we originally were in terms of this on-premise technology, which in the iterations of that on-premise technology reach out to various cloud services, but are essentially constrained to the box. Well, I'm here to tell you that with the new business models that we have and the new challenges that we face in terms of cybersecurity, that web firewalls, okay, and I'd be very careful about what we're talking about here today, web firewalls as access control have a lot of value propositions in the market. Now, we obviously know this for a couple of reasons. The macro reason being is that the cloud firewall market is projected to grow, okay? This comes from the insights into the various cloud markets proposition. Interestingly enough, the fastest growing market is in Asia, followed by Europe, but America is where the majority of the financial opportunity space exists. So you have fastest growing technology adoption in some regions of the world, and then actually the majority of the forward-leaning businesses that are coming off that moat and wall castle structure and moving into the amorphous cloud space, really is driving these opportunity spaces. Now, a couple of things to really talk about this is if you're going to start looking at things that deal at the network challenges that you're having, and you're trying to protect things that for whatever reason are high risk within your organization, this is an opportunity to embrace technology and approach the problem from a different perspective. And this simply because the new capabilities of the the cloud-based firewall is a significant advancement in the technology stack that we have today, and also has that scalability at the cloud level and the ability to look at applications and endpoint behavior holistically. Now, I know there's sort of a lot of words, and trust me when I tell you I'm not really a marketing guy. What I am is a practical technologist that has been put into a leadership position to try and solve real business problems with the organizations that I've done contract work for or I've been employed by. So one of the biggest problems that we have right now with the whole ecosystem of what used to be the on-premise firewall is that recently it has come under serious attack with zero-day vulnerabilities, as well as vulnerabilities that required patching at a very rapid pace. Now, what you're looking at is a major artifact slash product that comes out. It's free from the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency of the United States. It's called, I call it the KEV, but it's the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, KEV for starters. Now, one of the interesting issues that we have here is this is like kind of after we know that there's this exploit is being targeted, and some of the exploits that were involved in those firewall models that I just had up there were devastating to organizations. They were devastating because the implementations and the code used in those devices has been ancient, and it has been around for a very, very long time indeed. That code is failing to live up to the capabilities of threat actors who are aggressively understanding what the vulnerabilities are of common type of components, software components that go into a lot of these products, which, to be fair, either have to be licensed in order to receive upgrades or have simply gone end of life, and the business has made the decision, a terrible decision, by the way, to just leave it in place because it seems to work. Now, one of the, I was going to throw this slide in, but then I decided not to for time processes. But one of the major exploits came out that hit a number of different models of firewalls from a number of big vendors was the ability to enumerate the user ID list that was contained, user IDs and passwords of accounts that were on the actual firewall itself. So this is for organizations that decided that part of their security would be to only give a set of credentials to folks that were going to get VPN access. Now, this is such an outdated business model because the reality is everybody is working from everywhere today. So even though you may be given a set of VPN credentials to work there, it was very difficult then to synchronize that with Active Directory because everybody wants, one password to give them access to all the resources that they need in order to do their job. So in many cases, what they did was they manually synchronized or SSO'd the firewall so that when that exploit triggered, it gave a set of valid credentials, not only for the VPN access, but also, folks, you guessed that, Active Directory and Office 365. And from there, the attack was easy to conduct, and through these VPN portals, these ancient VPN technologies, many organizations suffered ransomware attacks as a result. Now, I think I included as part of the resources this that you're looking at on the other side, the United States District Court. This was an FBI search warrant with a government order to actually conduct a cyber hygiene exercise focused on WatchGuard, particularly several models of WatchGuard, which were used in the early stages of the Ukraine-Russian war to do massive denial of service attacks. The issue was so grave that for the, I think, third time in FBI history, they got permission from, in this case, the Eastern District of California to seek out and patch those WatchGuard firewalls that hadn't been patched. Now, to be fair, if you were an IT person and you weren't taking the notifications that CISA sent out that there is a massive botnet, a Russian botnet that is being used to attack Ukrainian infrastructure, and they essentially are pleading and begging at you to patch this vulnerability, right? And you didn't, and the FBI had to come along and patch your infrastructure for you. This would be what I would call a terrible performance review for IT. Now, in the defense of IT, here's the problem that on-premise firewalls have historically. The information that the firewall generates is of interest to security, but in many cases, the care, feeding, and configuration of that firewall was left to network operations, or NOPs, as we like to do it. And sometimes, in a lot of organizations, NOPs works in a silo from SOC. And so we have this disconnect where a very critical device in the organization is perhaps managed by network operations who are of the mindset of open the ticket, close the ticket, open the ticket, close the ticket. And even because it's sitting in network operations, it might fall out of the scope of a typical vulnerability management program that would have at its center servers and workstations, to the neglect, unfortunately, of the firewall, which may not have the level of visibility. And you can see this in the evolution of firewall management, where now literally the firewall on-premise consoles are screaming at you to update or relicense the device, or a bunch of features, i.e. the features that are keeping you safe, right, end up becoming a huge liability and a huge hole into the organization. So again, if your performance review is being done by the FBI, I think the organization has some fundamental failures of communication between the SOC, the network operations, and the vulnerability management program. And that leads us to the paths of the dead firewalls. Now, I chose this particular picture of the Linksys RV 802 series, but it was also the 402 series, because it is more than 10 years old now, but there are thousands of them still in service. Even though they've gone end of life cycle, even though they have a unpatchable vulnerability in the DNS capabilities and daemon that runs on the actual system. And Cisco finally announced that all of the Linksys, unfortunately, and all of the RV402s and 802s now have to go to pasture because there is an undisclosed vulnerability in them that has been exploited by threat actors, and they are no longer going to push out a firmware update to fix that particular problem. Also, hilariously, these devices also introduced a crazy vulnerability, as the PIX firewall has, in that in order to access them, the certificates that are inside them, the self-signed certificate, which is naughty to begin with, but the self-signed certificate is not a sufficient length that a modern browser like Chrome or the other one that people use occasionally that comes bundled with Microsoft, can't even access the device anymore because the certificate isn't robust enough. So you actually now have to introduce, if you still had one of these things, you had to introduce a vulnerability in your organization in order to manage the thing that is supposed to be keeping your organization safe. I know, it's absolutely bonkers, right? But this is the path that we end up going down. And in the case of the Cisco PIX, you're going to laugh. The only thing that I could get, right, to manage a Cisco PIX in the modern era, right, to get the firewall rules in order to upgrade another firewall that would support those rules, was the browser built into an Amazon Kindle, okay, that I could connect to a Wi-Fi access point that connected into the actual Cisco PIX. And that was because the age of the Java on that particular device was sufficient to be able to support the CLI interface for the for the actual Cisco PIX. I know, like, absolutely bonkers and hilarious. All right. So now what we need to do here is we need to transition a little bit and talk about the architecture of the future. Now, it's not just a marketing term. It is about how to undo the sins of the past, as I like to say, right? Because what we did is we built networks that go back to the 70s, even earlier before, and we built them on fundamental protocols that thou shall never be secured or secured enough, right? And so the innate architecture problem that we have, this is why Zero Trust is starting to come in as a framework. So let's keep in mind, let's put compliance over on the back seat for a moment, okay? But let's focus on the issues around actual management of the core tendencies of visibility, automation, and orchestration. This isn't me making this up. This is Microsoft's approach to the whole idea of the zero trust security as a framework. Now, what would happen here is if this stuff falls out of it, okay, you gain compliance from following these visibility, automation, and orchestration. And you can even directly attach those to your NIST or your ISO 27001 compliance goals by enacting and building on this particular framework. Now, this is where network and infrastructure and apps and even data, along with endpoints, right? And I'm gonna caveat and say identity and access management is kind of a firewall problem, but it happens after the defense of your organization from exfiltration and infiltration. This is why we have the biggest challenge that we have today, folks, is that most organizations are a hodgepodge of infrastructure and apps that even fall outside of the control of the business itself. And thanks to some key players, which we'll get into in a moment, the nightmare of our data and our endpoints continues. Now, on the other side of the screen, I included this because this is a criminal indictment of a guy that repeatedly hacked organizations, including Armor Games. It is essentially a business case for the web firewalls of the future, for cloud-based firewalls, okay? This is really important to understand that protecting the back-end database from tampering and access controls based on the identity and access management capabilities and not exposing vulnerabilities to the internet is the key function of effective firewalling and segmentation within your organization, which the Zscaler products do. So if you have something that can't be patched, or you have something that has high-risk data in it, you need to surround it by other technologies because it is not only valuable to an attacker, but it's also essentially what the key critical systems are for that business, be it revenue generating, be it workflow generating. So this is where, we've ended up as a result of trying to continue to build networks in the way that we used to do and failing to move them into a future state where you have that visibility, automation, and orchestration, which I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides. Okay? So this is one of the things that becomes really important because threat actors are after your endpoints. Yes, they eventually get after your data and ransomware and wreck your day and all these kind of things. However, maintaining the endpoint integrity of your organization requires you to look at things and requires you to restrict those things that are being looked at. Now, you can see here that in this particular use case, all of the data for all of the applications and internet traffic was being pushed through the Zscaler various products. And you can see from this traffic for a large enterprise organization was significant and gives you insight into that integrity on the endpoints, and that includes your server stack, et cetera, in order to get a better understanding of what the perils are and the threat models that you're facing. So this data is actually the critical data that you can get from an organization. Now, I did steal this slide directly from Zscaler because I want to go through now and talk about specified use cases. Now, you can see that they talk about the elimination of VPN infrastructure and virtual firewalls and eliminate the need for various appliances within the organization by using these types of capabilities to the benefit. Now, to be fair, the more you activate within the Zscaler family, the more you pay. But at its most basic level, what it can do for you is provide that segmentation within your own data center or within your cloud and allow you to really control access and traffic behavior and spot problems before they become major problems. And you can see how internal apps can be protected and external apps can be protected as well. And the thing that falls out of this is that visibility that's been elusive in a lot of organizations that are trying to consume data at both the endpoint level of on-premise and then at the virtual level in the cloud as well, and throw it all together and try to get that comprehensive picture. By using a cloud-based firewall, you can protect those incredibly vital assets, but at the same time, you can gain visibility into the behavior of the endpoints and even set up a certain level of compliance for those endpoints when they attach to that vulnerable internal network. And you can enforce this as well. You can literally force people to call the help desk if they fail a compliance check for accessing a particular application. Now, the other thing too here is that this also deals with a huge issue that is starting to get on everybody's radar, which is that third-party compliance and managing third-party access to your infrastructure to support a support SLA. This is another area that has always been traditionally difficult to manage because you are literally going to have to create accounts for those folks on a number of systems, and then potentially restrict and isolate by IP access controls their access to the infrastructure that they need to support. Now, this is all part of protecting an OT environment or protecting specific systems, in a medical capacity, for instance, that are supported by, say, General Electric, but then the team from Rockwell might need access into an OT environment, for instance. Now, the other thing here that you find too as well is sometimes apps can be very sensitive to latency, and many of the non-web apps that are out there in the marketplace that are still being used by organizations that perhaps either have a client-server relationship or are only accessible through software that requires a specific connection that needs to be stable. This can also help you by using the various capabilities of traffic management. Now, of course, it can't fix a saturated link in your infrastructure, but what it can do is it can certainly identify the users that are having particularly problems and showing the number of connections and or failures that is going on. So it can bring to your attention network management issues on that particular console. And then the final thing here is, in some cases, you will get audit demands that require you to segment app and the DB, the database, but at the same time maintain API connections into a common infrastructure. This actually is a great way of protecting an organization from any sort of attempts to lateral move within the organization, because it will be detected and the activity will be detected on the client side of that particular endpoint device that is making that connection or trying to make those connection attempts. Now, we have been introduced and sold a bill of goods from Microsoft about all the amazing technology of Teams and of, well, no one is really using Yammer anymore, but of Teams and OneDrive, right, and SharePoint being the things that are leading organizations to massive data sprawl. And so I think what really needs to occur here is gaining that access that I had up on the slide about what your organization is doing here, especially when it comes to either social networking or other file transfer capabilities, because all of that stuff can be blocked, but it can also be picked up. And sometimes there's like legitimate use for large-scale file transfer, but at the same time, it will have your audit department completely cringing because you're using something that they lose control of. And if you look at a really great example of WeTransfer, they reserve the right to look at your data. It's in their third-party agreement with you. So transferring business sensitive information by a third party may not be in the best interest of the organization. But contrast that with the absurd storage costs and our terrible practices of not managing our data and turning the software hard drives that we used to have into a complete schmozzle of moving everything to SharePoint and paying for stuff on a monthly basis that we no longer need in the organization. Microsoft knows that we have bad data management habits, and they have built almost their entire service offering around our poor practices. And I'll give you an example of this where the organization came to the conclusion that they had no discipline when it came to snapshots. They had very little discipline when it came to log retention. And the biggest kicker was that their approach to managing the SharePoint was to continue to have people fill out IT service requests for more SharePoint space. Because, folks, SharePoint is a bit insidious in that it keeps revisions of each document at the size of that particular document. So if you've got a sales presentation, for instance, and you change the members of the audience that you're giving that sales presentation to, it creates a brand new document. And it creates a revision history. And its default setting is 500 revisions of every document that is potentially touched. But it gets a bit worse because when you delete it, it doesn't disappear, okay? Because it's still subject to the default SharePoint retention setting of 7 years. So there's a very good chance that after a couple of years of migrating to Azure for your storage or OneDrive and combining that with poor management of SharePoint resources, you could be paying for a massive amount of non-operational data over on a monthly basis. So this is an area where you need to understand the activity of those particular endpoints and what data storage management practices are. And what Zscaler can help you with is really understanding what those endpoints are up to, who are your biggest talkers, what are they doing in terms of data transfer. All of those things will become very important as you try to manage graphics designers, CAD people, marketing and sales professionals that are dealing with high-resolution art, and all of those type of things. So it gives you that critical insight into how to help other parts of the organization either manage data or manage endpoint. And let's face it, folks, now people are accessing the business data on all kinds of different platforms. So one of the things we need to determine, especially if it's a non-managed asset that is accessing sensitive data, accessing personal information, or applications that we know that are vulnerable, we have to make sure that those devices that are coming into the organization don't pose a threat. And one of the easiest ways to do that is either elevate the level of security and interrogation of that particular endpoint and force it to be compliant, or maintain an awareness of the various alerts that are being generated from Zscaler when it tells you that there could be a particular problem or issue, that it's seeing something strange. Because one of the advantages of the web or cloud-based firewall is really about it can work at massive scale and learn very quickly from other types of attacks. And I would suggest that on saturated links where firewalls, in fact, are getting updates about threat actor telemetry and stuff like that, the scalability of the cloud and the ability to apply machine learning algorithms at scale to keep you safe is going to be a faster, what we love to call a flash to bang. That something has happened and all of a sudden there's a major exploit going out there, like the next Log4j or some type of attack like that. All of a sudden you'll find that the web-based firewalls are picking up the telemetry, the bad guy telemetry, and letting everyone know that they have it, and that's moving at cloud speed, as opposed to on saturated links where the firewall may not be receiving updates in a timely manner anymore, or that update functionality has been degraded because of a licensing issue and stuff like that. So from my perspective, and where the value proposition comes in, as we look into our kind of, potential dystopian future, I'm going to leave you with a few ideas around why now to look at web firewalls as part of your next next hop, if you will, to embrace the ideas of zero trust. So the first challenge we have is the defender-driven natural evolution versus threat actor natural selection. The bad guys out on the internet, the bad actors, especially at the level of Conti and all of the other type of nation-state affiliated or backed threat actors, are doing reconnaissance. They may know your infrastructure better than you do, and they are looking for victims that are essentially not up to speed and not running security technology, and that it's showing up on various scans like Shodan and other vulnerability at-scale scanning technology. So what happens is the threat actors will look at and hash a login page for a particular piece of technology. They will quickly find the potential login site for an on-premise VPN firewall, and they will throw their exploit at it to see if they can gain access to it. If the exploit yields the information that they're looking for, they will pack that away and wait for an opportune moment, or they will sell that data that this company XYZ has a vulnerability on an external firewall. It is unpatched, and I was able to gain access or enumerate credentials from it. For defenders, you have to be able to detect that stuff, and you have to align your natural evolution, IT, the thing we love to talk about, which is the IT life cycle. And end of life means end of life, folks, because if it can't be patched and it's a key part of your defense in-depth posture, then it's the equivalent of draining the moat and walking along the drawbridge and getting into the castle the easy way. Okay, so really what I'm telling you here is that we have to pay attention to those perimeter defenses, and if you're reliant on them, but more importantly, you have to realize that taking a vulnerable application and putting it in the cloud does nothing to prevent that application being exploited in the cloud unless you wrap some security around it. And the most likely test scenario of popping something that is in the cloud is through an on-premise asset that is accessing that cloud in a non-secure way, okay? And that's what I'm talking about when we go and we prolong those legacy systems and we just move it into the cloud landscape, right? But we don't add that mitigative control layer around it and make it only accessible through a Zscaler client, for instance. Now, the other issue that we're faced with is more and more trying to prove that we have adequate security in place, okay? The idea here is really around the regulatory action and landscape that's coming down versus mandating mandatory data protection controls. So security now has two problems. The first is they have to actually be functional and fixing and maintaining the integrity, the confidentiality, and the availability of the systems, even across the silos of network operations and end-user computing, or your IT help desk functions, or your IT server management functions. But they need to show proof that the security that is in place is effective, right? So you need capabilities in order to swat down those attacks to prevent the worst from happening from your organization, but you also see concrete documentation and logs in order to prove that what security you have is effective. And this is where the reporting capabilities, the traffic analysis capabilities of the cloud-based firewall are going to be able to give you that type of reporting that will at least allow the audit department or even the pen testers an understanding of your security posture and give you a realistic maturity rating. Now, the other piece, too, is compliance and constraints. We are living in a world where the UK and the United States are sort of, in a way, parting ways when it comes to data sharing, with sort of Germany leading the charge and very uncomfortable with personal data being transferred anywhere outside of Germany. There are grudgingly acceptable data transfers happening to other EU countries, but they are very opposed to German personal data being transferred into the United States. Now, interestingly enough, compliance is starting to drive these things as Europe unleashes a bunch of new laws that are really creating an issue between how American tech expands and dominates the landscape, and what can be charitably described as kind of antitrust and WTO action impeding the ability of American tech to expand into Europe and the UK. So the idea now is that you will need to be able to assure regulatory compliance, but also compliance when it comes to the various data protection laws that are out there. So as an example, if you're in Saudi Arabia and you're doing business in Saudi Arabia has some very stringent data protection laws, as does China. So this is one of the things where you're going to need the ability to be very flexible into your approach and lock things down to particular geographies or to deal with particular scenarios of access to systems that contain data of citizens that have enhanced rights when it comes to data privacy expectations and protections. So I kind of want to end it off here and go to some of the questions, and I've seen the questions kind of popping up to me. Yeah, I think it's now time to ask me the tough questions.
Thanks so much, Ian. Yeah, we have a couple of questions, actually a bunch. Let's try to get through as many of them as we can before we move on to our next presentation. The first one is from Eleanor, who asks, we have an OT environment. Can firewall technology help us isolate this network?
Yeah, definitely. Now, I saw something really cool in the last quarterly brief that I received in Zscaler. It's called Privileged Access Management for particular OT scenarios. I got the high-level view of this, but essentially it's like a jump box, but it's all being run over a web interface, and you can throw all sorts of different security in front of it. And what the advantages of that particular technology is it gives you the ability to get that telemetry, to understand it, to log it, and to spot major problems and restrict access to that technology. So check it out or ask our sponsors about that technology, because it is, when you look at all of the different types of OT solutions that are out there in terms of trying to, segment it off, it can be an immensely expensive undertaking. And I think web firewalls might be the answer at a much more economical rate than buying another flashy light box.
Right. And then let's get one more question in here from Eric, who asks, is there value in ingesting the cloud firewall logs into a SIEM? Is it worth the cost of storage?
Oh, that's a tough one. That really comes down to understanding what your risks are and what your major crown jewels are of the organization. Now, the one thing I will say is that the logs and information that Zscaler can generate will really help you from a forensic perspective understand if there's fundamental problems and, I'm going to say strange behavior going on with your environment, which then should get the threat hunting team super excited and deployed, quite possibly in an incident response scenario, because at least you'll have the level to understand the telemetry of all of the different events that are happening. And if you start looking at those from a MITRE attack perspective, you can see that it went from endpoint compromise to specific exploitation attempts on specific infrastructure, and what the results of that, those series of events happened. I think it's sort of like if you want that major level of intervention capability in the early stages of cyber attack, consuming Zscaler logs into your SIEM is probably the best way to go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ian. That was a great presentation and a discussion, as always.